everybody. Welcome to Using My Story. Today we have an awesome guest. She drove here all the way from Santa Barbara. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Devin, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, of course. So, just so you know, there's going to be a lot of different kinds of people that are going to watch. Some people struggle with addiction. Some people are family members of those loved ones, and some people just want to learn more. So, we're really excited to hear your story and hear you share about it. And I know it's going to help a lot of people.
I hope so, and I'm a very open person, so feel free to reel me in at any point in time.
Of course, of course. So, uh, you already shared your name. What was your drug of choice, and how long have you been sober?
My drug of choice was Xanax bars, and I was getting them on the street. I wasn't having them prescribed. And then, due to the Xanax, I was, dabbling in other hard drugs just to kind of counteract the effects of the Xanax. So, cocaine, a little bit of heroin in the last months of my addiction. I actually just hit 5 years sober on Monday. So,
Congratulations.
thank you. I am over the moon about that. That's a huge deal in the recovery community and alone me in itself, just with like the last 2 years that I've had to go through, it's a really big deal. So very proud of myself.
Super proud of you. Also,
Thank
that's a
you.
big accomplishment.
Thank you.
So, let's go way back to the childhood. Tell us what your childhood was like.
I grew up very fortunate. Honestly, I have both my parents. They're still together. Very loving, supportive family. I am the only child in my entire family's like history, which is an interesting dynamic because all of my cousins, they have siblings,
Yeah.
and we're the only ones on the West Coast. So it was really just me and my parents. I'm very close with my dad. I've always been really close with my dad. He's an incredible man. My relationship with my mom is a little bit more complicated, but the older that I'm getting, the more we're like figuring it out. She's also an incredible woman. We just have butt heads a lot. I think we're very similar. And also, being an only child, they didn't really have anywhere else to direct their energy. So I grew up pretty sheltered. I didn't really party too much I didn't get into drugs in high school. I didn't drink. For the lack of better, like, I was a good kid.
Yeah.
I did get into some fights. I had some aggression issues and, typical like girl fights in high
Yeah.
school. But that's really kind of the extent of like the wild child.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is definitely some generational trauma and some outside family like issues that
Yeah.
I'd prefer not to get into, but there's definitely addiction on both sides of my family, whether it be like alcoholism or drug addiction. And the older I got, the more I realized how prevalent it actually played a part into
Yeah.
the whole picture. And I was exposed to it very young, and I didn't really remember that memory until the healing kicked in, and I
Yeah.
was like, oh man, I was like 11 years old when that happened. So yeah, really, like, I can't really say anything bad about my childhood and like my
That's good.
family as a whole. There's definitely things that have come out as I've gotten older and have been able to understand them better that I'm like, oh wow, like that's a bit of a lot to process.
Yeah.
But again, it's things between my family hopefully can work out. So
For sure.
yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
Well, so we know your drug of choice is Xanax. When was the first time you used?
Oh my goodness. So I went to a party school. Like, I lived in Isla Vista, and
Okay.
the the community and just kind of the general energy was just like recreational drug use and just being as reckless as you could possibly be, and it wasn't really an ordeal. So I moved out from my parents' house when I was 17, right after I graduated college, and I mean high school, and a 17-year-old running loose in a college town with no rules, no guidance,
Mm-hmm.
no sense of self at
Yeah.
all. I kind of just hit the ground running. So I was probably 17 when I first started using just recreationally in college with friends. And then I was about 20 when it really took off and got the ground running, and was really getting more into like the Xanax bars for more than just like oh, I'm hungover, I'm going to take a Xanax. It was,
Yeah.
oh, I'm bored, I'm going to take a Xanax, or
Yeah.
this, that, and the other. So
Oh, it's been an hour. I'm gonna take a
yeah,
Xanax.
yeah. Like, I can't even remember if I took the last one. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, I would say 20 for sure is when I hit the ground rolling. I was sexually assaulted when I was 18,
Okay.
and that definitely catapulted an immense amount of trauma and just things that I refused to deal with. From that, I got into a really awful relationship for about 3 years, both physically and emotionally abusive. And so my baseline for how I viewed myself and how I let other people treat me and love me, for lack of a better term, was completely thwarted and warped and just so like ass backwards.
Yeah.
And the drugs really helped me kind of baseline myself and just feel nothing, for lack of a better term. Like I liked the feeling of nothing because I just felt so much chronically and all the time.
So, what was your favorite thing about the Xanax? Was it that it made you feel nothing?
Nothing. Yeah. I mean, I looking back on it now after I've had 5 years to kind of reflect in my as my brain's healing, I wish I could remember more of my active addiction, but because of the nature of Xanax, I have no recollection of like a lot of things that I was doing or wasn't doing or feeling or saying. All I know is there was such immense amounts of pain that I was feeling in my body that wasn't physical, and I didn't know where to put it, that I was like, oh, I'm gonna take 4 to 5 Xanax bars
Yeah.
and not feel anything and tap out for the next 18 hours. And at that time, I weighed like 86 to 90 pounds. So I was really playing Russian roulette with like popping that many Xanax at a time.
Yeah. Can you? So, a lot of people, like, I've never taken Xanax, and a lot of people that watch, they all struggle with different things. Can you talk a little bit about the physical and mental effects of taking Xanax? Like,
Totally. Yeah.
explain that a little bit.
So for people who don't know, Xanax is in the benzodiazepine, and it falls under an anxiety medication. It's a controlled anxiety substance. However, I was getting them from the street, meaning that they could have been pressed pills, they could have been mixed with literally anything. Thank the universe that this was the pre-fentanyl era that we're currently in, because I can't even imagine what would have happened at that point in time.
Yeah.
But basically, what it does for you is it completely subdues your central nervous system and just kind of blacks you out, for lack of a better term. So it's just a really bad blackout. You don't feel anything. Like, you literally feel nothing. You feel like you're weightless, like you're just floating in water. There's no thoughts happening. For me, I struggled with my appetite, so the appetite aspect was a really nice, because you would get so unbelievably hungry.
Get the
You would,
munchies.
yeah, you just want to eat snacks. Like, I could go through all of 7-Eleven in like 12 hours and just eat the whole every aisle. But it's like, where does it all go?
Yeah.
And my body was just eating itself ultimately, because there was just no organs and no meat for there to be any sustenance like in my body.
Yeah.
So essentially it's a central nervous system suppressor, and it just knocks you out. Like, it makes you completely unaware of what's going on around you, makes you completely unaware of your own self. It's one of the worst, I think, possible drugs you could get addicted to, because the addiction happens quick. You take a couple bars and 5 years later you're
Yeah.
heavily addicted to Xanax. And like,
Wow.
and with the Xanax, like I said, for me personally, cocaine followed the Xanax, because I'd have to go to work in the morning and I need to be up, and it makes you really drowsy, really sleepy. People take Xanax, to go on flights so they can sleep throughout the entire flight, because it really genuinely knocks you out. Like, and
So you're not. So when you're off that many Xanax, you're not awake. You're just gone. You're just
basically, yeah.
asleep.
And like, in the weirdest, when I look back on my addiction, I was what's some would consider a functional addict, because I would have my routine of going to work in the daytime, and then I'd come home at night, and like literally I would remember it'd be like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, go get everything I needed to get for the night, whether it be like food, drink, water, whatever. Let my roommates know that I was home, and then just like go into my room and lock myself away like a hermit for the next 18 hours until I'd have to wake up the next day and do it all over again. And I thought I was doing a really good job of hiding it until it got to the point where I was completely emaciated, that I was so unbelievably thin that people started to pick up on something's not adding up in this equation. So,
Wow. So, all right. So let's talk about real quick. Say if someone has a feeling that their loved one is struggling with Xanax, what are some signs that they'll be able to see?
Xanax has a lot of similar effects to heroin. So, if you're, and that's kind of where it gets tricky because they are very similar in the effects of like someone takes Xanax and they're going to be nodding out on the couch. And like with Xanax, a lot of the time it's just they're really thin, they are irrational. Like the decisions they're making aren't really making much sense. Kind of sneaky. I know a lot of people who, in my personal circle, who were dabbling in Xanax were very sneaky about it.
I've always heard people like black out and just start stealing random stuff.
That happens too, and a lot of people take them while they're also drinking, which is literally the most lethal combination ever because alcohol is also a suppressant, and you're putting two downers together. What's going to happen? Your heart's going to stop.
Yeah.
And so there's two, like, I would always say that there's two types of Xanax addicts. There's like the Xanax addicts where you can tell they're just doing the bars, and there's the Xanax addicts who are Xanax and drinking at the same time, and those are a little bit more, I call them tornadoes because they're a little bit more,
You don't
like,
know
they're
what's
not
gonna
like
happen.
slumped on the couch so much
Yeah.
as they're kind of just like all over the place and not really
Yeah.
making a lot of
Yeah.
sense. So yeah, I would say honestly, it's a very touchy subject, and I wish I could remember more of how the conversation went down with my roommates and my parents about them realizing that something was wrong. But I would honestly use your best judgment. Like if you think someone that you love is using in any capacity, whether like no matter what it is, like approach the person with love. Like don't come at them from a place of aggression and like judgment because that's not going to get anywhere. I promise you. It will only make things worse, and if anything they'll bail. Like they're going to bail, and then you won't see them. Like I know for me, when I had the talk with my friends and family, I was adamant that I go to rehab on my terms, and like that needed to be done because I felt that if I didn't do it on my terms, there was not going to be a successful ending. And that's exactly what happened. Is they let me go on my terms, and 5 years later, I'm thrilled to say that I am still sober. But I would definitely say, regardless of what the person is using or what you suspect they're using, come at it from a place of love and compassion and like as minimal judgment as you possibly can. And try maybe before you go into it to gather some education for yourself. Like, Google's a great, literally, Google's a wonderful invention. That way you can kind of have some ground to stand on so you can kind of know what you're talking about. But the biggest thing, honestly, in dealing with people who are in active addiction or, go back and forth between being an active addiction and not being an active addiction is the compassion and like the lack of judgment from people closest to them. And that doesn't mean that you don't need to hold your boundaries because addicts need boundaries. Like that's a firm,
Yeah.
like that goes without saying. So, but there's a difference between holding your boundaries and just like completely being an asshole.
For sure. So let's talk about the withdrawal symptoms. What are those like?
Oh my goodness. I very rarely had withdrawals because I was using so frequently and that I would prevent myself from having the withdrawals. But I remember that I went on a trip to back to visit my family in Chicago, and I could only take set amount of Xanax for the trip, right? I'm also hiding this from my parents. Like they don't know what's going on. And you just feel like total complete shit. Like nauseous. You can't eat anything. You're extremely irritable. Like I was oh my god, I was hell on wheels. Like nobody touch me, nobody look at me. There's still like a sneaky aspect of things because you're fiending. You're trying to find a way of like how can I get what I need to get. But in my case, there was no option for me. So my withdrawal symptoms, like I said, when I got sent into treatment, I had one of the worst detoxes they had ever seen. They call it the delirium tremens, and I basically had to be medically watched for 24/7 because of the fear of seizures. The biggest withdrawal symptom from Xanax is seizures, and that's extremely dangerous. Also, your heart can stop because, again, your central nervous system is shutting down, and that's a vital system in your body.
For sure.
So I just remember the nausea was brutal. The irritability was really intense, and it was just the only thing I could think of was I wanted to get another Xanax, or like, how am I going to get a Xanax, or like, how am I going to alleviate the symptom? How am I going to smoke some weed to make myself feel better? And it just became this cycle of that's all I could think about, and all that I was pretty much honed in on it. And like, my grandmother's dying, and all I can think of is like, oh, how am I going to get a Xanax? Like, be so serious. Like, that's just, now looking back on it now, like it gives me the ick because I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
But I didn't know any better at the time because I was just doing what I was doing in my life.
For sure, for sure. What do you think the hardest thing you've had to deal with since you got sober? What do you think that is?
There's been a couple of things. I mean, the biggest thing that when I first came out of treatment, I felt like a toddler. Like, I felt like I was learning life over again. You know, first year of sobriety, everyone will tell you it's a very emotional and a very intense year because you're learning everything for the first time again. Your emotions are coming back to you. Like, you're still kind of like teetering on, like, you're not fully well, but you're getting there. So that was, and still to this day, that's a lot. It's a lot. There's always new situations that are thrown my direction, and I'm like, ooh, because I used to just check out and not deal with it at all. Grief is a really interesting thing to deal with when you're in active recovery, especially grief on the level that I had to experience it. I'm trying to think of like the way that I could offer like a sentiment that would resonate with somebody, but there's really no way to sugarcoat like dealing with something like the heavy emotions, like losing a loved one, losing a parent, losing an animal. Like, all of those things are really hard to deal with. So emotions, for sure. Yeah, just like learning how to stabilize yourself and then like stabilize the world around you. And like, you lose a lot of friends when you get sober. At least in my case, I lost pretty much everybody who was initially in my circle. And at first it burns because you're like, this is when I need you the most. But then you look back on it and you realize that like sometimes people just don't have the capacity to like meet you where you're at. And like, I'm not gonna compromise like who I am or like what I'm working towards just to like have some friends in my life.
100%.
Because the friends that I have now have been with me through it all. Like, my best friend, Sophia, visited me every weekend in rehab for 3 months, like every Sunday. Like, who could ask for a better support system than that, you know? So it's like, the universe does a good job of weeding out what they need to weed out, but emotions for sure are like the biggest thing. And then also, I feel like when you're coming out of treatment, getting a mental health diagnosis in general is really difficult because you're on a bajillion different types of medications. Like, it took them up until maybe a year and a half ago to get my diagnoses right. And so for a while, I was all over the map with medication. So medication, emotions, and then body image. That's a big one because, you know, you go from being stick thin. In my case, I went from literally being 86, 85 pounds to being 160 pounds, which really is healthy and like normal for, I'm almost 30. So like, that's perfectly normal, but it's a drastic jump. So it's kind of hard to accept yourself in that space because you're like, whoa, but then you're like, but I'm healthy. So it's like, so it's definitely, it's a process. It's a day to day, like, don't give up on yourself. Like, be gracious with yourself. That's all I can say is like, give yourself some grace. Like, one day at a time. Like, one day at a time.
I like that.
Yeah.
Wow. What do you think is something you would want to share? You know, we have a little bit more time. So do you want to talk a little bit about the losses?
Yeah.
You want to share a little bit about that?
Totally. I'm going to try and do this in a way that is like respectful to his family as well. I 2 years ago, I lost my former partner and best friend to a homicide, and that's something that they don't prepare you for in rehab. Typically, you know, they don't talk about the grief and the grief on that level because that's still something I have a hard time wrapping my head around. And I, like, in full transparency, like, it almost took me out. Like, there was a period of time where, like, I admitted myself to the psych ward because I was so severely depressed and just so suicidal with the thought of just, like, the emotions were just too much for me to deal with, that I thought I needed the extra help and the extra support. Personally, for me, I'd probably never go that route again, like the psych hospital route. I found that there's different modalities and different options for me, like trauma programs and like experimental therapies that have worked much better. I felt that putting myself in the psych hospital just made things worse. And it's still something we're trying to figure out. I don't think that we're ever going to get an answer as to why he was taken from us. Unfortunately, drugs were a big part of his demise. He was in active addiction, and it led him to the point that he ended up being killed. It doesn't excuse it, and like
Right.
I try to remind people that when I tell the story, that just because he was an addict doesn't excuse that like someone decided to take his life.
Right.
And he should absolutely still be here. I wholeheartedly believe that, and I wholeheartedly believe that this situation could have been prevented and shouldn't have ever happened. But there was a strong period in time where like, and I genuinely did not believe that I would be here with you currently right now on this earth, because the emotions were just so overwhelming. And again, they don't tell you how to deal with that in rehab. Like, they tell you about like, oh, you know, like, don't get in a relationship your first year of treatment because like you can't, like, you know, like, yeah,
You're not a real human.
yeah, exactly, like your emotions are weird. But then it's like, okay, so what happens when like your parent passes away, or like in my circumstance, like someone decided to play God and take his life, and like that's a really gnarly
Yeah.
concept in itself to like deal with, let alone in the manner that things kind of went down. So that one I honestly don't have like a flat out answer because I'm still navigating it. It's an everyday
Yeah,
situation.
for sure.
As I was telling him prior to you coming, it's an ongoing thing with the court and stuff. So it's gonna just be one of those things that again is a day by day.
One day at a time.
Right. And again, gracious. Like, be gracious with you. I tell myself, how would you talk to your best friend? Or like, how would you talk to your little sister? Like, that's how you should talk to yourself in your head. And it's hard. It's hard to like unlearn, the negative like thoughts and the negative like ways we talk to ourselves. Cause like I'm the first person to be like negative and throw myself a pity party. Like, let me
Get
tell
it
you.
together.
But like, right? Like girl. But I tell myself all the time, and I tell my best friends when they're like, kind of down and out, I'm like, you need to be gracious with yourself. Like, like women are badass. Like, and like, why, like, however you're talking to yourself, you need to talk to yourself the way you talk to your little sister, your little brother, your best friend, your grandma, like your mom, like, just like, you just got to be nice to yourself. And it all starts with that, because once you realize that you deserve better, you start getting better. And like,
Good. I like that.
yeah.
That's solid. Be nice to yourself.
Yeah, be nice to
Solid.
yourself. Like,
I like that.
You're the only you in this world. Like, be nice to yourself. And like, I want you around, and so I'm sure everybody else does too.
I like that. So take a couple minutes and say one last thing, to people who are struggling that might want to reach out for help. You talked a little bit about treatment, and if anybody needs treatment or you know somebody that needs treatment, you could always hit the link in the bio. We have a lot of resources. But talk a little bit to that person that is struggling to reach out right now. What would you say?
I mean, the first thing that I would say is that, like, you're not alone. And I know that sounds so cliche. Like, it's so cliche for people to be like, you're not alone. Like, you're by, but like, you really aren't. Like, there's so many people who are going through addiction in some capacity, in some form. And the best thing that you can do for yourself is just have people in your corner, And I know it's scary, and I know you probably aren't even aware of it yourself, but like, you deserve the best for yourself. And like, I can say this now, being 5 years sober, like, my life has drastically improved, and like, I never saw that happening. I never saw there being any positive to where I was at. Like, I was so close to being dead that my treatment center and my therapist almost didn't accept me. And like, now I'm alive and I'm thriving and I love life. And it's, again, it's a day by day process, and you just got to be gracious with yourself. The first step is asking for help, you know? And even if that's, confiding in like whoever your person is, but you deserve better. You deserve to be here. You deserve to be sober. You deserve to be happy. I want you here. He wants you here. We all want you here. So, again, resources in the bio. You can reach out to me on TikTok. My TikTok is, oh my God, a bunch of letters and numbers, but they'll have it.
Put it there.
But yeah, again, just be gracious with yourself. One day at a time, like we do recover. We
That's right.
do.
That's right.
So
Love it.
I
Well,
love you.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank
We
you
really
for having me.
appreciate you driving all the way out, sharing your story, helping us be nice to ourselves again. If anybody needs help or you know someone that does, share the video with them. Feel free to reach out, and let's continue to use our story.